I walked outside with my coffee, opened my laptop like it was any other Monday, and watched it spin and spin and spin. 2 hours later, my driveway was full of strangers asking for my ID, and the president of the Homeowners Association was standing across the street holding her clipboard like it could save her. All because someone cut one cable behind my house clean deliberate like they'd measured it. My name's Ethan Brooks. I work remote, and I'm the kind of guy who picked a quiet neighborhood on purpose. Maplewood Glen, Cedar Ridge Drive, trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, kids on scooters, the whole suburban screensaver. The catch. There's always a catch was the HOA, not suggestions, not guidelines. Rules, fines, violation letters, and a monthly meeting where grown adults argue about paint shades like it's national security. And right in the middle of it was Marcia Davenport. Mid-50s, perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect smile that never reached her eyes, and a clipboard she carried like it was a badge. I noticed her the first week I moved in. I'm unloading boxes, sweaty, exhausted, and she's already standing at the edge of my driveway like she'd been assigned to me. "Welcome to Maplewood Glen," she said, voice syrupy. "Just so you know, we take community standards seriously here." Then she glanced past me, straight up at the side of my house, like she was scanning for weaknesses. A few weeks later, I had my internet provider come out to tidy up my line. Nothing wild, just a run that was already there, plus a small exterior box because my job depends on a stable connection, and I'm not gambling my paycheck on spotty service. Marcia appeared the moment the technician opened his van, not even kidding, like she had an alert set for working-class activity. She didn't greet the tech. She looked at me and said, "Is that permanent?" I told her. "It's standard equipment. It's not hanging, it's secured, and it's on my property." She nodded like she'd heard a confession. "Exterior modifications require approval," she said. "We don't want visual clutter." Visual clutter. My house wasn't cluttered. My house was normal. Her control was the only thing out of place. The next day, I got my first letter from the Homeowners Association. Notice of non-compliance printed in bold like I'd committed a felony, accusing me of unauthorized infrastructure and negative impact to neighborhood aesthetics. I emailed back politely with photos and the provider's work order. I quoted the section of the bylaws about utilities, because I'm that guy when I have to be. Marcia replied in 3 lines. "Remove it. Restore the exterior. Compliance deadline Friday." After that, the letters came in waves. Sometimes it was the cable, sometimes it was the technician's truck being unapproved commercial parking. Sometimes it was a warning that exposed infrastructure could pose a hazard, as if my house had become a live grenade. At first I tried to stay calm. I saved every email, took pictures, wrote down dates because I'd learned fast that with an HOA feelings don't matter, paper does. Then came the morning everything snapped. I woke up early, sat down in my garage office, and my connection was dead. Not slow, not glitchy. Dead like someone flipped a switch. I checked the modem, restarted. It did the whole little dance you do when you're hoping it's just a hiccup. Nothing. So I went outside and followed the line along the side yard behind the fence to where it ran into the alley. And there it was, my cable severed clean in 2 like it had been cut with a tool. No fraying, no chew marks, no storm damage. Just a neat slice, the kind you don't get by accident. My stomach dropped in that very specific way it does when you realize it's not a problem. It's a person, and you already know which person. I called the provider, voice tight, trying not to sound like I was accusing the entire neighborhood. They told me a technician could be out in an hour. While I was still on hold, Marcia walked right up my driveway. No hesitation, no awkwardness, like she owned the concrete. "Oh, wow," she said, hand to her chest, like she was auditioning. "I heard you're having an issue." I stared at her and said, "How would you hear that?" She didn't blink. "People talk," she said. "And exposed lines are a known concern. That's why we have standards." I pointed toward the cut cable. That line wasn't exposed. It was secured. Now it's cut. Her smile tightened. "Well, accidents happen." I stepped closer, keeping my voice low because I didn't want to be the guy yelling in the street at 7 a.m. "Marcia, did you do this?" She lifted her chin like I'd insulted her family. "Of course not," she said. "But if you'd complied on Friday, you wouldn't be dealing with this." That right there. That was the moment I felt my grip slip. Because what do you do with that? You can't argue with someone who thinks consequences are a feature, not a bug. For about 10 minutes, I seriously considered just folding, not in a dramatic, maybe I'm wrong, way more like, maybe I reroute the line, pay the fee, keep my head down, and let this neighborhood swallow one more piece of my life. Then my phone buzzed again, my boss checking in meeting in an hour, cameras on client present, and I looked at that clean cut in the cable and thought, no, if I give in now, it won't stop at a cable. The technician arrived around 8:30. He took one look, crouched down, and said, "Yeah, that's a tool cut. Clean as hell." He started taking photos more than I expected. Then he made a call I couldn't quite hear, and his whole tone changed, less casual, more careful. He said, "This line, it's tied into a routed communications path that's monitored. Not the internet's important, not you should upgrade, but monitored, like there were eyes on it somewhere higher than my street." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Monitored by who?" I asked. He shrugged like he didn't want to say too much. "Look, it triggers protocols when it drops unexpectedly. I'm just telling you what the system flagged." Within an hour, Cedar Ridge Drive didn't feel like Cedar Ridge Drive anymore. First, another service van showed up. Then a dark sedan I didn't recognize, parked perfectly, not blocking anything, drawing attention by being too careful. Then another sedan. Then a third vehicle, and suddenly blinds were shifting up and down all over the street like the neighborhood itself was breathing. 2 men and a woman walked up to me. Professional calm, the kind of calm that makes you answer questions correctly. They asked for my ID, asked me to confirm my employment, my schedule when my connection was last stable. I answered slow factual because you don't freestyle when someone's taking notes. The woman said the interruption registered at 2:14 a.m. and tripped a protocol review. We need to establish cause. Cause, not what happened, not are you okay? Cause. And that's when Marcia stepped forward like she'd been waiting for her cue. She planted herself in front of her driveway, clipboard in hand, and said way too brightly, "I'm the HOA president. I keep detailed records of everything that happens here." She started talking before they even finished their question. How she'd noticed the cable on her morning walk, how she reported it immediately, how important community standards were, how dangerous exposed infrastructure could be. They listened. They always do. Then the woman asked, "What time was your walk, ma'am?" Marcia hesitated just a flicker. "Early," she said. "Around 6. The woman glanced at her notes and tilted her head a little. "Interesting," she said, because the interruption registered at 2:14 a.m. I watched Marcia's fingers clamp tighter around that clipboard, and I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, more like the world clicking back into alignment. They asked Marcia where she'd been the night before, who had access to the alley behind the houses, whether she owned tools that could cut reinforced fiber. Marcia answered fast, too fast. Every word sounded practiced like she'd rehearsed in the mirror. That's when Caleb Miller, my quiet neighbor across the alley, raised his hand like we were in class. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said, voice steady, "but my security camera might have something." He pulled up footage on his phone. Grainy night vision, but the timestamp was crystal clear, 2:12 a.m., and there she was. Marcia, unmistakable, even in infrared, pacing along the fence line, stopping, bending down, then standing back up like she'd just finished a task. The street went silent in a way I'll never forget. No lawnmowers, no chatter, no fake laughter, just the sound of everyone realizing what they'd been living under. Marcia's face drained so fast it was almost scary. And the agents didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't do anything dramatic. They just shifted gears. "Ma'am," the woman said, "please step aside." Marcia opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to smile again, and it didn't work. They asked for consent to review call logs. They asked for clarification on her earlier statements. And the clipboard, the thing she'd used to intimidate half this neighborhood, slipped right out of her hand and clattered onto the concrete. That sound was louder than any shout could have been. By late morning, the repair crew reran the line and my modem blinked back to life. But by then, the cable wasn't the main issue anymore. Statements were taken, evidence logged. The severed piece was bagged like it mattered because it did. Marcia was escorted back to her house, not in cuffs, not with sirens, just with that unmistakable weight of consequence hanging on her shoulders. At noon, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting. No snacks, no call to order, no polite smiles, just facts on folding tables and faces that finally looked scared of the thing they'd empowered. The vote didn't take long. Unanimous Marcia Davenport removed as president, effective immediately pending investigation. And right there, right at that moment, she stopped being the person who could walk up my driveway and tell me what my life was allowed to look like. Lesson learned: power loves paperwork until evidence shows up.